What if I told you that in the heart of Mississippi in 1838, there lived a man so cruel that his very name made enslaved people pray for death rather than capture? A man who turned human hunting into an art form and murder into a business. Before you judge this story as too dark, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, share this video with someone who appreciates real history, and comment below telling us what state you're watching from, because this tale of Ezekiel Graves will challenge everything you think you know about the antebellum South. Now let me take you back to a time when cotton was king, and some men sold their souls for gold. My name is Ezekiel Graves, and I reckon most folks who hear that name either cross themselves or spit in the dirt. Can't say I blame them none. What I done in the year of our Lord 1838 ain't something a man talks about with pride, but it's something that needs telling, even if it damns my soul to the deepest pit of hell. I was born in Natchez, Mississippi in 1802 to a cotton planter who owned 300 souls and worked them till they dropped. My daddy, Jeremiah Graves, was what you might call a practical man. He didn't beat his slaves for pleasure like some of the other planters. No, sir, he beat them for profit. A scared nigger is a productive nigger, he used to say, sitting on the veranda with his mint julep, watching the fields stretch out like a green ocean under the Mississippi sun. The plantation house sat on a hill overlooking the Mississippi River, white columns gleaming like bones in the morning light. Below, the slave quarters stretched out in neat rows, little more than wooden boxes where human beings were stored like tools. The cotton fields rolled on for miles, and in the distance you could see the dark line of cypress trees that marked the beginning of the Great Swamp. I grew up watching my daddy's overseer, a man named Caleb Hutchins, work those fields with a bullwhip and a loaded pistol. Caleb was missing 2 fingers on his left hand, lost them to a slave who fought back in 25. After that, Daddy made sure every runaway was brought back alive so they could be made an example of in front of the others. When I turned 16, Daddy handed me my inheritance, a leather whip with 9 tails, each one tipped with a piece of broken glass. "This here belonged to your granddaddy," he said, his eyes cold as January rain. "He used it to keep order, and now it's your turn to learn the family business." But I had other plans. In 1820, when I was 18, I left the plantation to join the military, thinking I could escape the blood and cotton that stained our family name. I served in the frontier wars, fighting Creek and Seminole Indians in Alabama and Florida. I learned to track a man through swamp and forest, to read signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth that most folks would never notice. I learned to kill quick and quiet, and I learned that some men have a taste for it. When I came back to Mississippi in 1835, Daddy was dead, and the plantation was failing. The slaves had grown bold in my absence, and 3 families had run off to the north. The cotton yield was down, and the creditors were circling like buzzards. I sold the land to pay the debts, but I kept the whip and the skills I'd learned in the army. That's when I met Colonel Harrison Blackwood, owner of the largest plantation in Warren County. He was sitting in the Natchez Tavern, complaining to anyone who'd listen about the nigger problem that was plaguing the river counties. Slaves were running off in record numbers, following the Underground Railroad north to Ohio and beyond. "What we need," Blackwood said, his face red with whiskey and anger, "is a man who can track them down and make sure they never run again, not just bring them back for a whipping. That don't work no more. We need someone who can put the fear of God into every slave from here to Vicksburg." I set down my drink and looked him in the eye. "I'm your man," I said, "but I don't work for free, and I don't work gentle." Blackwood smiled, and I saw something in his eyes that matched what I felt in my own heart, a darkness that had been growing since I was a boy, watching human beings work to death in the cotton fields. "How much?" he asked. $50 for every runaway I bring back," I said. "100 if they don't make it back alive." He shook my hand, and that's how I became what the slaves called the Devil's Hound, the most feared slave catcher in the Mississippi Delta. The tools of my trade were simple: a horse named Judas, black as sin and fast as lightning, a pack of bloodhounds trained to follow human scent, a rifle that could drop a man at 200 yards, and my daddy's whip, which I'd modified with razor wire instead of glass. But my real weapon was fear. Word spread through the slave quarters like wildfire. Ezekiel Graves was coming, and he didn't bring runaways back alive. My first job came in March of 1838. A family of 4, mother, father, and 2 children, had escaped from the Blackwood plantation in the dead of night, heading for the river crossing at Natchez. They had a 6-hour head start, but I caught up to them before they reached the water. I still remember the look in that woman's eyes when she saw me coming through the morning mist, my dogs baying behind me. She grabbed her children and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The Mississippi stretched out in front of them, wide and brown and impossible to cross without a boat. "Please, mister," the man said, stepping in front of his family. "We ain't done nothing wrong. We just want to be free." I looked at him for a long moment, this man who was willing to die for his family's freedom, and I felt something twist in my chest. But then I thought about the $100 waiting for me back in Natchez, and I raised my rifle. "Freedom ain't for your kind," I said, and pulled the trigger. The sound echoed across the water like thunder, and the woman's scream followed it. I killed them all that morning, man, woman, and 2 children who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. I left their bodies by the river as a warning to others who might think about running. When I rode back to Blackwood's plantation, he was waiting for me on the veranda, counting out bills. "I heard the shots," he said. "I take it the problem is solved." "Solved permanent," I replied, taking the money. "Word will spread, you won't have trouble with runaways for a while." But I was wrong about that. If anything, the killings seemed to make the slaves more desperate, more willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom. And that suited me just fine, because Colonel Blackwood wasn't the only planter willing to pay for my services. By the end of March, I had contracts with plantation owners in 3 counties. They called it the Graves Solution, a final answer to the runaway problem that was plaguing the Cotton Kingdom. The terms were simple. I would hunt down any escaped slave, and I would make sure they never ran again. As spring turned to summer, and summer turned to fall, I rode through the Mississippi countryside like the angel of death, my dogs at my heels and my rifle across my saddle. The slaves began to whisper stories about me, how I could track a man through running water, how I could see in the dark like a cat, how I never missed a shot, but they were wrong about one thing. I wasn't the devil, though I served him well enough. I was just a man who had learned to kill his conscience along with his prey, one bullet at a time. And as 1838 drew to a close, I had 98 souls on my ledger, 98 people who had died for the crime of wanting to be free. I thought I was building a reputation that would last forever. I had no idea that my reckoning was coming, in the form of a young woman whose mother I had killed, and whose hatred burned brighter than the Mississippi sun. You know what they say about the devil. He always collects his due. But what happens when the devil himself starts having second thoughts? Stay with me as we dive deeper into this true story of the antebellum South, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this video with anyone who needs to hear this piece of American history. Drop a comment and let me know what state you're calling home while you watch this unfold. Now let me tell you about the morning that changed everything. The day I realized I wasn't just hunting slaves, I was hunting pieces of my own soul. January 15th, 1838. The morning air was so cold it burned your lungs, and frost covered the cotton stalks like tiny diamonds. I was sleeping in my cabin on the outskirts of Natchez when the pounding came at my door. 3 sharp knocks, then silence. I knew that sound. It was the signal Colonel Blackwood used when he had work for me. I pulled on my boots and opened the door to find young Timothy Blackwood, the Colonel's son, standing on my porch with his hat in his hands. The boy was maybe 19, with soft hands and softer eyes, the kind of boy who'd never had to do anything harder than count cotton bales. "Mr. Graves," he said, his voice shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, "Daddy sent me to fetch you. We got a runner." I strapped on my gun belt and reached for my coat. "How long they been gone?" "Since before dawn." "It's that boy Marcus, you know, the one who works in the stables. Daddy thinks he's heading for the river crossing at Ellis Cliffs." I knew Marcus. He was maybe 17 years old, strong as an ox and smart as a whip. His mama had died the previous winter from pneumonia, and his daddy had been sold off to a plantation in Louisiana. The boy had nothing left to lose, which made him dangerous. "Tell your daddy I'll have him back before sunset," I said, whistling for my dogs. "Dead or alive?" Timothy's face went pale. Daddy said to use your judgment." I saddled up Judas and loaded my rifle. The bloodhounds, Rex, Caesar, and Brutus, were already picking up the scent trail from the stable where Marcus had worked. They were good dogs, bred for hunting men, and they never lost a trail once they had it. The trail led east through the pine forests that bordered the Blackwood plantation. Marcus was moving fast, But he was making mistakes, breaking branches, leaving footprints in the soft earth, even dropping pieces of cloth on the thorns. Either he was panicked, or he was young and inexperienced. Maybe both. I followed the trail for 3 hours, the dogs baying ahead of me like the hounds of hell. The sun was climbing higher, burning off the morning frost and turning the forest into a steamy maze of green shadows and golden light. Spanish moss hung from the oak trees like funeral shrouds, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the Mississippi rolling toward the Gulf of Mexico. I found Marcus at Ellis Cliffs, just like Timothy had predicted. He was standing on the edge of a limestone bluff that dropped 50 feet to the river below, looking out at the brown water like it was the promised land. He had a small bundle tied to his back, probably everything he owned in the world. When he heard my dogs coming through the trees, he turned around, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't expected. It wasn't fear, it was determination. This boy had made his choice, and he was prepared to die for it. "Marcus," I called out, staying in the tree line with my rifle ready. "You know who I am?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Graves," he said, his voice steady as stone. "I know who you are, and I know what you do." "Then you know there ain't no point in running. Come on down from there and we'll head back to the plantation. Colonel Blackwood might go easy on you if you don't cause no more trouble." Marcus laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Easy? Mr. Graves, you know as well as I do that ain't no such thing as easy for my kind. Colonel Blackwood gonna work me till I drop, just like he worked my mama till she died coughing up blood in that cold cabin." I stepped out of the trees, keeping my rifle trained on him. The dogs were circling now, waiting for my command. "That may be true, boy, but dying ain't gonna change nothing. You jump off that cliff, you'll just be another dead nigger in the Mississippi. Nobody gonna remember your name." "Maybe not," Marcus said, "but I'll die free. That's got to count for something." For a moment, we just stood there looking at each other, a 17-year-old slave boy who wanted to die free, and a 36-year-old white man who made his living hunting human beings. The morning sun was warm on my face, and I could smell the river and the pine trees and the fear sweat coming off the boy. I thought about my daddy's whip hanging on the wall of my cabin. I thought about the 97 people I'd killed in the past 10 months and the money I'd made from their deaths. I thought about the way the other planters looked at me now, with respect and fear and something that might have been envy. And then I thought about something else. I thought about the way Marcus had said, "I'll die free," like freedom was worth more than life itself. I'd never understood that before. Freedom had always been something I took for granted, like breathing or the sunrise. "You really think it's worth it?" I asked him. "Dying for something you ain't never had?" Marcus looked out at the river, then back at me. "Mr. Graves, you ever been a slave?" "No." "Then you wouldn't understand." He was right, and we both knew it. I raised my rifle and sighted down the barrel at his chest. At this distance, I couldn't miss. One shot and I'd have another $100 in my pocket. One shot, and the Blackwood plantation would have one less problem to worry about, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way the morning light caught in the boy's eyes, or the way he stood there without begging or crying or trying to bargain for his life. Maybe it was the fact that he reminded me of myself at that age, young and angry and looking for something worth dying for. "Marcus," I said, lowering my rifle slightly, "what if I told you there was another way? What if I told you I could get you north to Ohio or Pennsylvania, where you could be free for real?" The boy's eyes widened. "Why would you do that? You're a slave catcher." "Maybe I'm tired of catching," I said, and as soon as the words left my mouth, I knew they were true. "Maybe I'm tired of killing boys who just want to be free." For a moment, I thought he might take the offer. I could see him thinking about it, weighing his options, but then he shook his head. "I can't trust you, Mr. Graves. You killed too many of my people. Even if you mean it now, how do I know you won't change your mind tomorrow?" He was right again. I had killed too many people to expect trust from anyone, especially from a slave boy standing on the edge of a cliff. I had made my reputation with blood and fear, and now that reputation was all I had left. "I understand," I said, raising my rifle again. "I'm sorry it has to be this way." "So am I," Marcus said. I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the water like thunder, and Marcus fell backward off the cliff, his arms spread wide like he was trying to fly. I watched him fall until he hit the water with a splash that seemed too small for a human life. I stood there for a long time, looking down at the river where the boy had disappeared. The dogs were whining and pacing, confused by my hesitation. They knew something was wrong, but they couldn't understand what. When I finally turned away from the cliff, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: shame. Not guilt exactly, because guilt was something I'd learned to live with. This was different. This was the feeling that I had just killed something inside myself, along with that boy. I rode back to the Blackwood plantation in silence, the boy's body tied across my saddle like a sack of grain. Colonel Blackwood was waiting for me on the veranda, counting out bills. "I heard the shot," he said. "Clean kill." "Clean enough," I replied, taking the money. "Good. Word's already spreading through the quarters. This should keep the others in line for a while." But as I rode away from the plantation that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. For the first time in my career as a slave catcher, I had offered mercy to a runaway, and for the first time, I had been refused. Marcus had chosen death over capture, freedom over life, and in doing so, he had shown me something I didn't want to see, that there were things in this world worth dying for, and I was standing on the wrong side of all of them. That night, I dreamed about the boy falling from the cliff, his arms spread wide like wings. In my dream, he didn't hit the water. He just kept falling, down and down into darkness, and I could hear him calling my name. When I woke up, I was covered in sweat, and I could still hear his voice echoing in my ears. "Mr. Graves, you ever been a slave?" No, I thought. But maybe I was about to find out what it felt like to be trapped by something you couldn't escape. What happens when evil becomes a business model? When human suffering turns into a profitable enterprise that spans multiple counties? Before we dive into the darkest chapter yet, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more untold stories from American history. Share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth about our past, and comment below with your location. I love seeing where our community is watching from around the world. Today I'm going to tell you about the day 3 of Mississippi's most powerful men decided to turn genocide into a contract, and how I became their willing executioner. February 3rd, 1838. The Natchez Grand Hotel was the finest establishment between New Orleans and Memphis, with crystal chandeliers imported from France, and carpets thick enough to muffle the sound of conspiracy. I was sitting in the hotel bar, nursing a whiskey and trying to forget the sound of Marcus hitting the water, when the invitation came. A well-dressed Negro servant approached my table, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Mr. Graves, Colonel Blackwood requests your presence in the private dining room. He says it's a matter of business." I followed the servant through the hotel's mahogany-paneled corridors to a room where 3 men sat around a table laden with crystal glasses and imported cigars. I recognized them all: Colonel Harrison Blackwood, the Cotton King of Warren County, Judge Thaddeus Whitmore, who owned the largest plantation in Adams County, and Senator Marcus Beauregard, whose family had been growing cotton in Mississippi since before statehood. These were the men who controlled the Delta, who owned thousands of slaves and millions of acres of the richest farmland in America. When they spoke, governors listened. When they acted, the economy of the entire South trembled. "Ezekiel," Colonel Blackwood said, gesturing to an empty chair, "sit down, we have a proposition for you." I took the offered seat and accepted a glass of bourbon that probably cost more than most men made in a month. The 3 planters studied me like I was a prize bull they were considering purchasing. Judge Whitmore spoke first. He was a thin man with silver hair and cold blue eyes that had sentenced more men to death than yellow fever. "Mr. Graves, we've been following your work with great interest. Your methods have proven quite effective in dealing with the runaway problem." "Effective enough," I replied, taking a sip of the bourbon. It burned smooth and clean, nothing like the rot-gut whiskey I usually drank. Senator Beauregard leaned forward. He was younger than the other 2, maybe 45, with the kind of soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a pen. "The problem, Mr. Graves, is that your current approach is too limited. You work for one plantation at a time, solving individual problems as they arise. We need something more comprehensive." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew. Colonel Blackwood spread a map across the table. It showed the Mississippi River counties from Natchez to Vicksburg, with each plantation marked in red ink. "We're proposing a partnership, Mr. Graves. The 3 of us control over 200 plantations in this region. We employ nearly 15,000 slaves, and every year we lose hundreds of them to the Underground Railroad." Judge Whitmore picked up the explanation. "The current system isn't working. We catch some runaways, we punish them publicly, but more keep running. The problem is that the punishment isn't severe enough. A whipping heals, a branding fades, but death is permanent. I set down my glass and looked at the map. Each red dot represented hundreds of human lives, thousands of people who might someday decide that freedom was worth dying for. You want me to kill every runaway slave in 3 counties, not just the runaways, Senator Beauregard said quietly. We want you to eliminate the problem at its source. Every slave who runs, every slave who helps a runner, every slave who even talks about running. We want you to create such a climate of fear that the very idea of escape becomes unthinkable. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Outside, I could hear the sounds of Natchez going about its business, horses clopping on cobblestones, merchants hawking their wares, children playing in the streets. Normal sounds of a normal world, while 3 men sat in a hotel room planning mass murder. How many are we talking about? I asked. Colonel Blackwood smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We estimate that in any given year, approximately 3 to 5% of our slave population either runs away or assists runaways. That's roughly 500 to 800 individuals. You want me to kill 800 people in 1 year? We want you to kill as many as necessary to solve the problem permanently, Judge Whitmore corrected. If that number is 800, so be it. If it's more, so be it. I thought about Marcus, falling from the cliff with his arms spread wide. I thought about the family I'd killed by the river, and the 96 others who had died by my hand in the past year. The idea of multiplying that number by 8 or 10 made something cold settle in my stomach. But then I thought about the money. 800 kills at $100 each would be $80,000. More money than most men saw in a lifetime. Enough to buy my own plantation, my own slaves, my own piece of the Cotton Kingdom. What's the pay? I asked. Senator Beauregard reached into his coat and pulled out a leather portfolio. We're prepared to offer you a base salary of $5,000 plus $100 for every confirmed kill. Additionally, we'll provide you with horses, dogs, weapons, and whatever other equipment you need. He slid a contract across the table. The paper was thick and expensive, with the kind of legal language that made simple murder sound like a business transaction. At the bottom were 3 signature lines and spaces for witnesses. There are conditions, of course, Judge Whitmore added. You'll work exclusively for us for 1 full year. You'll maintain detailed records of every kill, including names, dates, and methods, and you'll operate with complete discretion. No bragging in taverns, no unnecessary publicity. What about the law? I asked. Killing a slave is still murder, even in Mississippi. Colonel Blackwood laughed. Mr. Graves, we are the law in these counties. Judge Whitmore here has sentenced more men to hang than any other judge in the state. Senator Beauregard writes the laws that govern slave ownership, and I own enough politicians to ensure that your activities will never be questioned. I read through the contract carefully. It was thorough and precise, covering everything from payment schedules to disposal of bodies. There was even a clause about what would happen if I was killed or incapacitated during the course of my duties. My family would receive a death benefit of $10,000. Not that I had any family left to receive it. There's one more thing, Senator Beauregard said. We want you to understand that this isn't just about stopping runaways. This is about sending a message to every slave in the Mississippi Delta. We want them to know that the very idea of freedom is a death sentence. We want them to be so terrified of escape that they'll turn in their own family members rather than risk our wrath. You want me to break their spirits, I said. Exactly. A broken spirit is more valuable than a strong back. A slave who has given up hope of freedom will work harder, live longer, and cause fewer problems. I thought about that for a moment. Breaking spirits was different from breaking bodies. Bodies healed, but spirits could stay broken forever. I would be killing more than just runaways. I would be killing the very idea of freedom itself. When do you want me to start? I asked. Judge Whitmore smiled. Immediately. We've already identified your first targets, a group of 12 slaves from the Beauregard plantation who have been meeting secretly to plan an escape. They're planning to run tomorrow night. How do you know? We have our sources, Colonel Blackwood said. Slaves who are loyal to their masters, who understand that cooperation is rewarded and rebellion is punished. They tell us everything we need to know. I signed the contract with a pen that felt heavier than my rifle. As I wrote my name on the bottom line, I felt something inside me die. the last small piece of conscience that had made me hesitate on the cliff with Marcus. "Gentlemen," I said, standing up and shaking hands with each of them, "you've just hired the most efficient killer in the Mississippi Delta. By this time next year, the runaway problem in your counties will be a thing of the past. We're counting on it," Senator Beauregard said. "The future of the Cotton Kingdom depends on men like you, Mr. Graves. Men who understand that sometimes civilization requires a firm hand." As I left the hotel that night, the contract tucked safely in my coat pocket, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I had a clear purpose, a defined mission. I wasn't just a killer anymore. I was a businessman, a professional, a solution to a problem that threatened the very foundation of Southern society. I walked through the streets of Natchez, past the mansions of the wealthy planters and the shanties of the poor whites, past the slave markets where human beings were bought and sold like cattle. The moon was full overhead, casting everything in silver light, and I could hear music drifting from the taverns and brothels along the riverfront. Tomorrow night, I would begin the systematic elimination of hope itself. I would hunt down 12 people whose only crime was dreaming of freedom, and I would kill them in such a way that every slave in 3 counties would hear about it and despair. But tonight, I was just a man walking through a sleeping city, carrying a contract that would make me rich and damn my soul forever. And for the first time in my life, I was completely at peace with both possibilities. The devil, they say, always collects his due, but sometimes, if you're lucky, he pays in advance. Have you ever wondered what happens when a man's conscience finally starts to fight back? When the ghosts of your past refuse to stay buried? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss these incredible true stories. Share this video with someone who appreciates real American history, and let me know in the comments what state you're watching from. Your engagement helps us reach more people with these important stories. Tonight I'm going to tell you about the moment when the dead started talking back, and how a killer began to realize that some debts can never be paid. March 20th, 1838. 2 months into my contract with the 3 planters, and I had already collected on 47 souls. The Beauregard 12 had been just the beginning, a midnight raid that left bodies scattered across a cotton field like broken dolls. Word spread through the slave quarters faster than cholera, and for a few weeks the escape attempts stopped completely. But fear, I learned, is like a dam holding back a river. Eventually, the pressure builds up so much that something has to give. By mid-March, the runaways were coming again, driven by desperation that was stronger than terror, and I was there to meet them, my rifle loaded and my conscience buried deeper than a Confederate grave. I was staying in a cabin on the outskirts of Vicksburg, a one-room shack that I'd rented from a widow, who asked no questions as long as I paid in gold. The cabin sat on the edge of a cypress swamp, surrounded by Spanish moss, and the constant sound of night creatures going about their business. It was the perfect place for a man who needed to disappear between jobs, who needed somewhere to clean blood off his clothes and count his money in private. That night I was sitting at my table, updating my ledger by candlelight. Each entry was precise: name, age, plantation of origin, date of death, method of killing, payment received. The pages were filled with neat columns of human lives reduced to accounting entries. Samuel Washington, age 23, Whitmore Plantation, March 15th, rifle shot to chest, $100. Mary Johnson, age 19, Blackwood Plantation, March 17th, drowning in Yazoo River, $100. Peter Adams, age 16, Beauregard Plantation, March 18th, knife wound to throat, $100. 47 names in 2 months, 47 people who had died for the crime of wanting to be free. The money was piling up in a strongbox under my bed, over $4,000 in gold and silver, more wealth than I'd ever imagined possessing. I was just finishing the entry for my latest kill, a woman named Sarah who had tried to escape with her infant son, when I heard it. A voice, soft and low, drifting through the cabin walls like smoke. "Ezekiel." I looked up from my ledger, listening. The swamp was full of sounds at night, owls hooting, frogs croaking, the splash of alligators moving through the water. But this was different. This was human. Ezekiel Graves. I stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the cypress trees cast twisted shadows across the swamp. I could see nothing but darkness and Spanish moss swaying in the night breeze. "Who's there?" I called out. my hand moving instinctively to the pistol on my belt. Silence. Then, after a moment, the voice came again, closer this time. "You killed my baby." My blood turned to ice water. I knew that voice. It was Sarah, the woman I'd shot 3 days ago as she tried to cross the Pearl River with her infant son. I'd put a bullet through her chest and watched her fall into the water, the baby still clutched in her arms. "You're dead," I whispered to the darkness. "I killed you myself." Laughter echoed through the swamp, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that brought joy. It was the sound of something broken, something that had been hurt beyond repair. "Dead, yes," the voice said, "but not gone. Never gone. We're all here, Ezekiel, all 47 of us. We're waiting for you." I grabbed my rifle and stepped out onto the cabin's small porch. The night air was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of rotting vegetation and stagnant water. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called out, its cry echoing across the swamp like a soul in torment. "Show yourself," I shouted into the darkness. "If you're real, show yourself." The Spanish moss began to move, even though there was no wind. It swayed and twisted, forming shapes in the moonlight. The outline of a woman holding a child, the silhouette of a man with his arms raised in surrender, the shadow of a boy falling from a great height. "We tried to run," another voice said. This one belonging to Marcus, the boy I'd shot at Ellis Cliffs. "We tried to be free, and you killed us for it." "You were slaves," I screamed back. "You belonged to your masters. I was just doing my job." "Your job," said a third voice, older and sadder than the others. This was Samuel Washington, the first man I'd killed under the new contract. "Your job was murder, Ezekiel. Your job was destroying hope." The voices began to multiply, overlapping and echoing through the swamp until it sounded like a chorus of the damned. Men, women, children, all the people I'd killed in the past 2 months, all speaking at once, all calling my name. "Ezekiel Graves, child killer, murderer, devil's servant." I fired my rifle into the darkness, the muzzle flash lighting up the swamp for a brief moment. In that instant of illumination, I saw them. Dozens of figures standing among the cypress trees, their clothes dripping with river water, their eyes reflecting the light like stars. But when the flash faded and darkness returned, they were gone. I stood on the porch for hours, rifle in hand, waiting for them to come back. But the swamp had returned to its normal sounds. Frogs and owls and the distant splash of something moving through the water. The voices were silent. When dawn finally came, I went back inside and tried to convince myself that it had all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by too much whiskey and too little sleep. But when I looked at my ledger, I found something that made my hands shake. There at the bottom of the page, written in handwriting that wasn't mine, were the words, "We remember everything." I slammed the book shut and shoved it into my strongbox, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The dead, it seemed, were no longer content to stay buried. Over the next few days, the voices came every night. Sometimes it was just one or two, whispering my name from the darkness. Other times it was the full chorus, 47 voices raised in accusation and sorrow. They told me about their lives, their families, their dreams of freedom. They described the moment of their deaths in perfect detail, reminding me of every bullet fired, every knife thrust, every life extinguished. I tried everything to make them stop. I moved to a different cabin, but they followed me. I drank myself unconscious, but they invaded my dreams. I even went to the local preacher, a fire and brimstone Baptist who promised that prayer could wash away any sin. "Brother Graves," he said, his eyes bright with evangelical fervor, "the Lord forgives all who truly repent. But you must turn away from your sinful ways and seek redemption through Christ." I wanted to tell him about the voices, about the faces I saw in the Spanish moss, about the way my ledger wrote itself in the middle of the night, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. Who would believe that the dead could speak, that guilt could take physical form and haunt a man through the swamps of Mississippi? Instead, I just nodded and dropped a gold coin in his collection plate. "I'll think about it, preacher." But I didn't think about redemption. I thought about the contract in my strongbox, about the money I was making, about the reputation I was building as the most feared slave catcher in the Delta. The voices were disturbing, yes, but they were just voices. They couldn't hurt me. They couldn't stop me from doing my job. Or so I thought. On March 25th, I received word that a group of 8 slaves had escaped from the Whitmore plantation, heading north toward the Tennessee border. Judge Whitmore was offering a bonus, $200 per head instead of the usual 100, if I could catch them before they reached free territory. I saddled up Judas and loaded my gear, determined to prove to myself that I was still the same efficient killer I'd always been. The voices were just a distraction, a sign that I needed to drink less and sleep more. They had no power over me, but as I rode out of Vicksburg that morning, I heard them following me through the trees, 47 voices whispering in unison, "We remember everything, Ezekiel Graves. And soon, you will too." I spurred my horse faster, trying to outrun the sound of my own conscience finally waking up. But you can't outrun the dead, especially when you're the one who killed them. The hunt was about to begin again, but this time, I wouldn't be hunting alone. This time I would have an audience of ghosts, watching my every move and reminding me that every bullet fired, every life taken, was another voice added to the chorus that would follow me to my grave. What happens when the past comes looking for revenge in the form of a young woman with nothing left to lose? Before we dive into this pivotal chapter, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more incredible true stories from American history. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the real cost of slavery. And drop a comment telling us what state you're watching from. I love connecting with our community around the world. Today I'm going to tell you about the moment when my past caught up with me in the most unexpected way possible, and how a dead woman's daughter became the instrument of my reckoning. April 10th, 1838. The morning started like any other, with blood on my hands and money in my pocket. I'd just finished tracking down the Whitmore 8, and 6 of them were dead. The other 2 had made it across the Tennessee line, but Judge Whitmore was satisfied with the message I'd sent. $1,200 richer, I was riding back toward Vicksburg when the telegram caught up with me. The messenger was a young white boy, maybe 14, riding a lathered horse and looking like he'd seen the devil himself. He found me at a crossroads tavern where I'd stopped to water my horse and wash the blood off my clothes. "Mr. Graves?" he asked, his voice cracking with nervousness. "I got a message for you from Colonel Blackwood." I took the telegram and read it while the boy waited, shifting from foot to foot like he needed to piss. The message was brief and urgent. "New group of runners, Beauregard Plantation. Leader is a young woman named Mabel. High priority, double payment. Come immediately." I looked up at the messenger. "When did they run?" "Last night, sir. Colonel Blackwood says there's maybe 15 of them, all heading for the Ohio River. He says the woman leading them is dangerous. She's been organizing escapes for months." I folded the telegram and put it in my pocket. 15 runaways was a big group, too big to move fast or stay hidden. They'd be easy to track, and at $200 per head, they represented $3,000 in profit, enough to make me the richest man in Warren County. "Tell Colonel Blackwood I'm on my way," I said, tossing the boy a silver dollar, "and tell him I'll have them all back within the week." But as I rode toward the Beauregard Plantation, something nagged at me about the name Mabel. I'd heard it before, somewhere in the long list of people I'd killed over the past year. It took me most of the ride to remember where. Then it hit me like a rifle shot to the chest. Mabel was the daughter of Sarah Johnson, the woman I'd killed 3 weeks ago while she was trying to escape with her infant son. Sarah had been 24 years old, a house slave who could read and write, skills that made her valuable but also dangerous. When I'd cornered her at the Pearl River crossing, she'd begged me to spare her children. "Please, Mr. Graves," she'd said, holding her baby boy while her daughter, Mabel, stood behind her with tears streaming down her face. "Take me if you have to, but let my children live. They ain't done nothing wrong." I'd shot Sarah through the heart and watched her fall into the river, the baby still in her arms. But I'd let the girl run. She couldn't have been more than 16, and she'd looked so terrified that I'd felt something like pity. I'd told myself it was mercy letting her go. Now I realized it was the biggest mistake of my career. I reached the Beauregard Plantation just as the sun was setting, painting the cotton fields red as blood. Senator Beauregard was waiting for me on his veranda, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. He was a man who prided himself on control, and losing 15 slaves in one night had shaken him badly. "Graves," he called out as I dismounted. "Thank God you're here. This is a disaster. The worst escape in the history of my plantation." "Tell me what happened," I said, following him into his study. The room was lined with books and maps, the walls decorated with portraits of dead Beauregards who had built their fortune on cotton and human misery. "It was planned," Beauregard said, pouring himself a large whiskey with shaking hands. Coordinated. They didn't just run, they organized. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. He spread a map across his desk, marking the locations where the escapes had taken place. They hit 3 different quarters simultaneously, taking only the strongest and smartest slaves. They left behind the old, the sick, the children who couldn't travel fast. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. And you think this Mabel girl was behind it? I know she was. My overseer saw her talking to the others in the weeks before the escape. She was recruiting, organizing, planning routes. The girl is smart, Graves. Dangerous smart. I studied the map, tracing the likely escape routes with my finger. Where do you think they're headed? North toward the Ohio River. There's a crossing at Cairo, Illinois, where the Underground Railroad has safe houses. If they make it that far, we'll never see them again. They won't make it, I said. 15 people can't move fast or stay hidden. I'll have them within 3 days. But even as I said it, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just another hunt. This was personal. Mabel had seen me kill her mother, had watched me shoot down the woman who gave her life. She knew my face, knew my methods, knew exactly what kind of monster she was dealing with, and she was still willing to risk everything to lead others to freedom. I set out at dawn the next morning, following the trail north through the Mississippi countryside. The tracks were easy to read at first. 15 people moving together left plenty of signs. Broken branches, trampled grass, footprints in the soft earth near streams. They were moving fast but not carefully, which told me they were either inexperienced or desperate, or both. I followed them for 2 days, the trail leading through pine forests and cotton fields, across creeks and through swampland. My dogs picked up the scent easily, baying with excitement as they followed the human trail north toward the Tennessee border. On the second night, I made camp in a grove of oak trees overlooking a valley where a small creek wound its way toward the Mississippi River. I was cleaning my rifle when I heard it, singing, drifting across the water like a prayer. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. It was a woman's voice, clear and strong, singing the old spiritual that slaves used to signal safe passage on the Underground Railroad. But there was something different about this voice, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I knew that voice. I'd heard it before, 3 weeks ago, screaming as I shot her mother. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I grabbed my rifle and crept through the trees toward the sound. In the moonlight I could see them, 15 figures gathered around a small fire in a clearing by the creek. They were sharing food and water, tending to blisters and cuts, preparing for another day of hard travel. And there in the center of the group was Mabel. She was taller than I remembered, maybe 17 or 18 years old, with her mother's high cheekbones and intelligent eyes. She wore a simple dress that had been torn by thorns and stained with mud, but she carried herself like a queen. When she spoke, the others listened. When she moved, they followed. She was everything her mother had been, and more. We're 2 days from the Tennessee line, she was saying to the group. Once we cross over, we'll be in free territory. But we can't let our guard down. The devil is behind us, and he won't stop until we're all dead. One of the men, an older slave with graying hair, looked nervous. Mabel, maybe we should split up. 15 people together, we're too easy to track. No, she said firmly, we stay together. That's how we survive, by looking out for each other, by being stronger together than we are alone. My mama taught me that before she died. Before she died. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had killed this girl's mother, destroyed her family, taken away everything she loved. And now she was here, leading others to the freedom her mother had died trying to reach. Besides, Mabel continued, I know who's hunting us. I know Ezekiel Graves, and I know how he thinks. He expects us to be afraid, to scatter like rabbits when he comes. But we're not rabbits, we're human beings, and we have just as much right to be free as any white man. She stood up and looked directly at the trees where I was hiding, as if she could see me in the darkness. And if Mr. Graves wants to stop us, he's going to have to kill every last one of us, because we're not going back to slavery, not ever. The group murmured agreement, and I saw something in their faces that I'd never seen before in runaway slaves. Determination instead of fear, hope instead of desperation. Mabel had given them something more dangerous than weapons or money. She'd given them belief. I could have shot her right then. One bullet and the group would scatter in panic, easy prey for my dogs and rifle, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she'd said her mother's name, or the way the others looked at her with trust and admiration. Maybe it was the voices that had been haunting me for weeks, reminding me that every person I killed was someone's child, someone's parent, someone's hope for the future. Or maybe it was the simple fact that for the first time in my career as a slave catcher, I was looking at prey that wasn't afraid of me. I crept back to my camp and spent the night staring at the stars, listening to the distant sound of spirituals drifting across the water. 47 voices whispered in my ears, but tonight they were joined by a new sound, the voice of a young woman who had seen the worst of humanity and still believed in the possibility of freedom. Tomorrow, I would have to choose. I could do my job, collect my money, and add 15 more names to my ledger of the dead. Or I could do something I'd never done before in my life. I could let them go. The hunt was entering its final phase, but for the first time, I wasn't sure who was hunting whom. Have you ever been lost in more ways than one? When the hunter becomes the hunted and reality itself starts to unravel. Before we dive into this psychological nightmare, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more incredible true stories. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand the real horror of America's past, and comment below with your location. I love seeing our global community engage with these important historical accounts. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the day I got lost in the Mississippi swamps and how the dead finally caught up with me in ways I never imagined possible. April 13th, 1838. 3 days into the hunt for Mabel and her group, and I was beginning to understand why they called the Mississippi Delta the land that God forgot. The swamp stretched out in every direction like a green hell, filled with quicksand and alligators, poisonous snakes and plants that could kill you just by touching them. Spanish moss hung from the cypress trees like funeral shrouds, and the air was so thick with humidity that breathing felt like drowning. I'd been tracking the runaways since dawn, following their trail deeper and deeper into the swampland. They were moving smart now, using the water to hide their scent, stepping on fallen logs to avoid leaving footprints, even splitting up and rejoining to confuse my dogs. Mabel was teaching them everything her mother had known about evading capture, and more. By midday, I'd lost the trail completely. I sat on my horse in a clearing surrounded by cypress trees, studying the ground for any sign of passage. My dogs were whining and pacing, confused by the maze of scents and false trails. Rex, my best tracker, kept circling back to the same spot, his nose to the ground, but finding nothing. "Come on, boy," I muttered, dismounting to examine the area more closely. "They came through here. I know they did." But the swamp had swallowed their trail like it swallowed everything else. The soft earth showed no footprints. The water revealed no disturbance. The vegetation showed no signs of recent passage. It was as if 15 people had simply vanished into thin air. I was studying a patch of disturbed moss when I heard it, laughter echoing through the trees like the sound of madness itself. But this wasn't the bitter laughter of the dead that had been haunting me for weeks. This was different. This was alive. "Looking for something, Mr. Graves." I spun around, rifle raised, but saw nothing except cypress trees and Spanish moss. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the water and filtering through the vegetation, until I couldn't tell which direction it had originated from. "Show yourself," I called out. "I know you're there." More laughter, closer this time. "Oh, we're here, Mr. Graves. We've been here all along. The question is, do you know where you are?" I looked around the clearing, trying to get my bearings. The sun was directly overhead, but the thick canopy of leaves made it impossible to determine direction. Every tree looked the same. Every patch of water reflected the same green light. Every trail led deeper into the maze. "You're lost, aren't you?" The voice was definitely Mabel's now, though I still couldn't see her. "Lost in the same swamp where you killed my mama. Lost in the same place where you've killed so many others." I fired a shot into the trees, the sound echoing like thunder through the swamp. Birds exploded from their roosts, and somewhere in the distance, an alligator bellowed in response. But when the echoes faded, there was only silence. "Wasting bullets, Mr. Graves? That's not like you. You're usually so efficient." I tried to mount my horse, but Judas shied away from me, his eyes rolling white with fear. The dogs were whimpering now, pressing close to my legs like they were seeking protection. Even my animals could sense that something was wrong with this place. "What do you want?" I shouted into the green darkness. "Justice," came the reply. And this time it wasn't just Mabel's voice, it was a chorus. Dozens of voices speaking in unison, the voices of everyone I'd killed over the past year. "We want justice, Ezekiel Graves." The Spanish moss began to move, even though there was no wind. It swayed and twisted, forming shapes in the filtered sunlight. The outline of a woman holding a baby, the silhouette of a man with his hands raised in surrender, the shadow of a boy falling from a great height. "No," I whispered, backing toward the center of the clearing. "You're dead. I killed you. You can't be here. Death is just another country, Mr. Graves," said Marcus, the boy I'd shot at Ellis Cliffs. "And we've been waiting for you to visit." The shapes in the moss became more solid, more real. I could see faces now, Sarah Johnson holding her infant son, Samuel Washington, the first man I'd killed under the contract, the Beauregard 12, standing together like a jury of the damned. 47 people, all looking at me with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. "This isn't real," I said, raising my rifle with shaking hands. "This is just guilt, just my conscience playing tricks." "Your conscience?" Sarah Johnson stepped forward, water dripping from her clothes, her baby still clutched in her arms. "You think you still have a conscience, Mr. Graves? You think there's anything left inside you that remembers what it means to be human?" I fired at her, but the bullet passed through her like she was made of mist. She smiled sadly and shook her head. "You can't kill us again, Ezekiel. We're already dead. But you're still alive, still breathing, still feeling. And that means you can still suffer." The clearing began to change around me. The cypress trees grew taller and darker, their branches reaching down like grasping fingers. The water turned black as ink, reflecting nothing but darkness. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on me like the weight of all my sins. "Where am I?" I gasped, struggling to breathe. "You're in the place where all killers end up eventually," said a new voice, one I didn't recognize. "You're in the swamp of your own making, surrounded by everyone you've wronged." More figures emerged from the trees, not just the slaves I'd killed, but others, soldiers I'd shot during the Indian Wars, men I'd murdered for money before I became a slave catcher, even my own father who had died cursing my name. "Welcome to hell, son," Jeremiah Graves said, his face pale and drawn. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to run, but my feet sank into the soft earth like it was quicksand. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank, until the black water was up to my waist. My rifle was gone, my dogs had vanished, and my horse was nowhere to be seen. "Help me!" I screamed, but the only response was laughter. Not cruel laughter, but the kind of laughter that comes from watching someone finally understand a joke they've been missing for years. "Help you?" Mabel appeared in front of me, standing on the water like it was solid ground. "The way you helped my mama? The way you helped all of us?" "I was just doing my job," I protested, still sinking. "I was just following orders." "Whose orders?" she asked. "God's? The laws? Or just the orders of men who paid you to murder children?" I had no answer for that. The water was up to my chest now, and I could feel things moving beneath the surface. Snakes and alligators and worse things, things that had no names. "Please," I whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Mabel studied me for a long moment. Her head tilted to one side like she was trying to decide something important. "Are you Mr. Graves? Are you really sorry? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" Before I could answer, she reached down and grabbed my hand. Her touch was warm and real, more real than anything else in this nightmare swamp. She pulled me up out of the water, back onto solid ground, back into the world of the living. "Everyone deserves a chance at redemption," she said quietly. "Even you. But redemption has to be earned, Mr. Graves. It has to be paid for." I found myself back in the original clearing, soaked with swamp water and shaking like a leaf. My horse was there. My dogs were there. My rifle was lying in the mud where I'd dropped it. Everything was exactly as it had been before the visions started. But something had changed. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood, in the very core of my being. The voices of the dead were still there, but they were quieter now, more patient. They weren't demanding vengeance anymore. They were waiting to see what I would do next. I picked up my rifle and looked around the clearing one more time. The trail was there now, clear as day. 15 sets of footprints leading north toward the Tennessee border. Mabel and her group were maybe 6 hours ahead, moving fast, but not fast enough to escape a determined pursuer. I could catch them. I could fulfill my contract, collect my money, and add 15 more names to my ledger. Or I could do something else, something that might begin to balance the scales of justice that had been weighing against me for so long. I mounted my horse and turned him around, heading back toward Vicksburg. Behind me I could hear the voices of the dead, but they weren't calling my name anymore. They were singing, the same spiritual I'd heard Mabel singing by the creek. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. For the first time in my life, I understood what those words really meant. They weren't just about death or heaven or escape from slavery. They were about redemption, about the possibility that even the worst sinner could find his way back to grace. I had a choice to make, and for once in my miserable life, I was going to make the right one. The hunt was over, but my real journey was just beginning. What happens when a killer finally faces the consequences of his actions? When the hunter becomes the hunted in the most final way possible? Before we reach the climactic end of this incredible true story, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more untold tales from American history. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the real cost of hatred and violence, and comment below telling us what state you're watching from. Your engagement means the world to us. Today I'm going to tell you about my final confrontation with Mabel, and how a slave catcher's reign of terror finally came to an end in the most unexpected way possible. April 20th, 1838. 7 days had passed since I'd let Mabel and her group escape into the Tennessee wilderness. 7 days since I'd made the decision that would define the rest of my short life. I'd returned to Vicksburg and sent word to my 3 employers that the runaways had crossed into free territory and were beyond my reach. The lie came easily. I'd had plenty of practice lying to myself over the years. Colonel Blackwood had been furious. Judge Whitmore had threatened to sue me for breach of contract. And Senator Beauregard had suggested that perhaps my reputation as the Delta's most feared slave catcher was undeserved. But I didn't care about their anger or their threats. For the first time in months, I was sleeping through the night without hearing the voices of the dead. I thought it was over. I thought I'd found some measure of peace by letting 15 people go free instead of adding them to my ledger of death. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could start to balance the scales of justice that had been weighing against me for so long. I was wrong. The knock came at my cabin door just after midnight. 3 sharp raps, followed by silence. I knew that sound. It was the signal my employers used when they had urgent work for me. But when I opened the door, it wasn't one of their servants standing on my porch. It was Mabel. She stood in the moonlight like an avenging angel, her dress torn and muddy from days of travel, her eyes burning with a fire that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. In her right hand she held my father's whip, the one with 9 tails tipped with razor wire, the one I'd left behind in my haste to escape the swamp. "Hello, Mr. Graves," she said quietly. "I believe this belongs to you." I reached for the pistol on my belt, but she was faster. Before I could draw, she'd stepped inside the cabin and closed the door behind her. We stood facing each other in the candlelight, predator and prey, though I was no longer sure which of us was which. "How did you find me?" I asked. "The same way you found all of us," she replied. "I followed the trail of blood and fear and broken families that you've left across 3 counties." She moved deeper into the cabin, her eyes taking in the sparse furnishings, the strong box full of blood money, the ledger where I'd recorded every kill. When she saw the book, she picked it up and began reading the entries aloud. Samuel Washington, age 23, rifle shot to chest. Mary Johnson, age 19, drowning in Yazoo River. Peter Adams, age 16, knife wound to throat. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. 98 names, Mr. Graves. 98 people who died because you needed money more than they needed freedom. "I let you go," I said desperately. "I let all of you go. That has to count for something." "One act of mercy doesn't erase 98 murders," she replied. "And it doesn't bring back my mama or my baby brother or any of the others whose blood is on your hands." She set the ledger down and picked up the whip, testing its weight in her hands. "Do you know what this feels like, Mr. Graves? Do you know what it's like to have your skin torn open by razor wire?" "Mabel, listen to me." "No," she said firmly. "You listen to me. For once in your miserable life, you're going to listen to someone else speak." She began to pace around the cabin, the whip trailing behind her like a snake. "I made it to Ohio, Mr. Graves. All 15 of us made it to freedom. We found the Underground Railroad. We found people who cared more about human dignity than profit. And we found new lives in a place where the color of our skin doesn't determine our worth." "Then why did you come back?" I asked. "Why risk your freedom to come after me?" She stopped pacing and looked at me with eyes that held more sadness than anger. "Because freedom isn't just about escaping slavery, Mr. Graves. It's about justice. It's about making sure that monsters like you can't keep destroying families, can't keep turning human beings into hunting trophies." "I've stopped," I said. "I'm done with slave catching. I'm done with killing." "Are you?" She reached into her dress and pulled out a telegram. "This came to the Beauregard plantation yesterday. It's a job offer from a planter in Alabama. 500 runaway slaves, and they want the famous Ezekiel Graves to solve their problem permanently." I stared at the telegram, recognizing the handwriting of Senator Beauregard's secretary. They were already lining up my next contract, my next opportunity to add names to the ledger of the dead. "I never saw that," I said weakly. "But you would have taken it, wouldn't you? The money's too good, the reputation too valuable. You would have gone to Alabama and killed 500 more people because that's what you are, Mr. Graves. You're a killer. It's all you've ever been, and it's all you'll ever be." She was right, and we both knew it. Even after everything I'd experienced in the swamp, even after hearing the voices of the dead and feeling the weight of my sins, I probably would have taken the Alabama contract. The money was too good. The alternative too frightening. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to understand what it feels like to be hunted," she said, raising the whip. "I want you to know the fear that every slave feels when they hear your name. I want you to experience the terror of knowing that death is coming for you, and there's nowhere to run." The first lash caught me across the chest, the razor wire tearing through my shirt and opening 3 parallel cuts across my ribs. The pain was incredible, like being struck by lightning made of fire and steel. I screamed and fell to my knees, blood soaking through my torn clothing. "That's for Samuel Washington," Mabel said calmly. "The first man you killed under the contract." The second lash caught me across the back, the wire biting deep into muscle and sinew. I could feel my strength draining away with my blood, could feel my vision starting to blur around the edges. "That's for Mary Johnson, who died trying to reach her children in Tennessee." The third lash wrapped around my throat, the wire cutting into my neck like a garrote. I gasped for air, tasting blood and copper and the bitter flavor of my own mortality. "And that's for my mama, Sarah Johnson, who died with my baby brother in her arms while you watched." I collapsed onto the cabin floor, my body broken and bleeding, my strength gone. Through the haze of pain, I could see Mabel standing over me, the bloody whip still in her hands. But her face wasn't filled with satisfaction or revenge. It was filled with the same sadness I'd seen in the eyes of all my victims. "I'm not like you, Mr. Graves," she said quietly. "I don't take pleasure in causing pain. But some debts can only be paid in blood." She knelt beside me and picked up my father's pistol from where it had fallen. "Any last words?" I tried to speak, tried to find some final statement that might serve as an apology or explanation for the life I'd lived. But all that came out was blood and the sound of my own labored breathing. "I didn't think so," she said. The shot echoed through the cabin like thunder, and I felt the bullet tear through my chest, piercing my heart and ending my reign of terror forever. As darkness closed in around me, I heard the voices of the dead one last time, not calling my name in accusation, but singing the old spiritual that had guided so many to freedom. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." They found my body 3 days later, when the smell finally reached the neighboring cabins. The local sheriff ruled it a robbery gone wrong. My strongbox was empty, my valuables were missing, and there was no sign of the killer. The whip was found coiled neatly beside my corpse, along with a note written in careful handwriting. "Justice has been served. The devil's hound will hunt no more." Mabel was never caught. Some say she returned to Ohio and lived out her days as a free woman, helping other escaped slaves find new lives in the North. Others claim she stayed in Mississippi, continuing to organize escapes and strikes against the plantation system. A few even whisper that she became a legend herself, the ghost of the Delta, a spirit of vengeance who protected runaway slaves and punished their oppressors. But I know the truth. Mabel was no ghost, no legend, no supernatural force of justice. She was just a young woman who had lost everything to hatred and violence, and who chose to fight back in the only way she knew how. She was everything I should have been, and everything I never could be. My name is Ezekiel Graves, and this is my confession. I killed 98 people in the year 1838, not because I had to, but because I chose to. I chose money over mercy, reputation over redemption, fear over love. And in the end, I got exactly what I deserved. The voices are quiet now. The dead have found their peace. And somewhere in the darkness, a young woman's voice still sings the old spiritual that carried so many souls to freedom. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.